All around us, we see adults and kids in this alphabet soup of neurological challenges: ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, sensory processing disorder. It is all around us. And if you're a chiropractor in practice, seeing families, you're going to see it. Today, we are talking about getting a brain-based lens so that we have this missing piece of the puzzle to put all of the things together and increase a person's efficiency, their joy, and to just help them to thrive through life. And we really have, I have to say, the expert in this, so I'm excited to share it with you. I'm Jenna Quinton, founder of Adjust Your Media and host of What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of an 8 podcast. And this episode is brought to you by my membership, Adjust Your Marketing Blueprint, where I help chiropractors to share these messages, share these stories so that more of the world, more parents can understand more about how our brains and nervous systems work, what subluxations are, and how chiropractic can help that. So let's dig into today's episode. Today's guest on What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure, Stories of an 8 podcast is Dr. Amy Spoelstra, and she is a chiropractor and a mom in Idaho. She also has the Brain Blossom program and Focus Academy that we will talk about more as well. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Great to see you.
Yeah, so we met in Denver and I've been fascinated with your work for a while. So I would love if you would tell us a story about how chiropractic helped improve someone's life.
Well, in our work and in our practices and the doctors that we work with, we primarily work with kids. Now, this work is not limited to kids by any means. We definitely see adults as well, but I'm really, really passionate about working with kids because when we can change the trajectory of a child's life, we're just making this massive impact and ripple on not just them and their trajectory and how they engage and connect and learn right then in their life, but through their whole life, and gets those building blocks set for their whole life, but also impact their family, right? And so a lot of the times when we are in practice and we have a patient that comes to us, we're looking at their primary concern, whether it's a pediatric patient or an adult patient. A parent comes in and says, my primary concern is my child's impulsive behavior or inability to attend in class or whatever it is. We see a lot of those behavior learning socialization challenges. That's our primary area of interest in the Focus Academy and the Brain Blossom program. So we see that come in. And oftentimes as providers, we often want to just be really monocular in, okay, we're treating that. But in reality, that primary concern, that observable behavior, that challenge is a window to the brain. And it's also a window to the system of the whole family and how this child is going through life. And so what I like to look at, the wins and the things that get me most excited are, yes, tracking and seeing changes with kids' ability to engage more efficiently and appropriately in a classroom and have more efficient and deeper social connections and, regulate self better and have awareness of their own emotions. But really that, and then watching how that's changed the impact and the culture of the whole family and how the family unit is operating, and then how the family is operating in the community and they're not as isolated. Those are the things that get me most excited. Those are the things that we see every single day in our practices. And we have systems and, clinical systems, clinical protocols, and also kind of the softer collection of data like parent surveys and our doctors learning to have those observational skills. We call it watch and wonder skill, to be able to track all of that, right? To be able to not just go, what is this child that came to me with this impulsive behavior? Is the impulsivity getting better? But also, how are they doing in connecting and engaging and learning in their own self, outside of themselves, in their families, in their classrooms, in their communities? And those are the biggest wins that we see all the time. And that it's really important for us as providers working with pediatrics and families to be able to know what to look for, right? And know how to get the results, know how to ask the right questions, know how to put together the right, what I call clinical tools, and also right now strategies for the families, but then be able to actually track that. So when you say, give me a story, I've got about 1 million stories because I've been in for 17 years, but in a nutshell, that's what we are all about. And that's what gets me most excited, is watching that whole family dynamic and community dynamic change with the people that we work with.
I love that because it is so true. I have 4 kids from the ages of 15 to 6. And, it is amazing how in that family unit, one child, particularly we're recording this in December, so thinking about something happy that we're doing, like let's go pick out a Christmas tree. Everybody should be happy. Nobody should be having a problem. And yet, what inevitably happens when you're going to do that, and there's somebody who is off, who can't find their shoes, whose socks are itchy,
Yeah.
who, didn't really eat lunch for whatever reason, where you're like, I do not know what is up with this kid. And maybe it's a habitual thing, even, we see that where this is the norm, but you're like, I just thought we could get a Christmas tree today. I thought
Yep.
that we could hold it together and do something fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the meltdown happens, and then you're in the parking lot of an Ace Hardware being like,
Yep.
Christmas.
Yeah. And then what happens is now we've got this scenario where we have this child who you mentioned multiple different reasons, and there can be very specific developmental and neurological underpinnings that may predispose a child to being more sensitive to the itchy socks and more sensitive to the not eating the lunch, or maybe the texture of the lunch was off and the integration of that sensory input was off. So we have more avoidant behavior, or a predisposition to having emotional regulation challenges. So one sibling kind of took some of their control as opposed to being able to kind of roll with that and see the future a few steps, and what we call top-down regulate from the prefrontal cortex down. This child maybe doesn't have that ability in their bucket to do that. So then what we end up with is the child in the Ace Hardware parking lot that's losing it. And then we have a bad kid, right?
Right.
And then we're like, okay, so what behavioral strategies, we call these right now strategies, which is important that our doctors can provide right now strategies of understanding, okay, why maybe are we seeing this? What do I do in the right now? But also, how do I use our clinical tools to address and determine if maybe there's some underlying neurological reasons that we are having challenges with what we call those upstream issues that we talked about before that led to this downstream. We do not have a bad kid, but we do have a window to a brain. And if it's a pattern, that's something that we need to be able to address. And then what happens is if we have this all the time, well, either the child then has to become isolated because, well, they just can't come to outings like that, or the family becomes isolated because
Exactly.
they cannot go into the community and do things like that. So the whole culture of the family changes, and the impacts on the other siblings is pretty big, and these become embedded patterns. So when we work with one child and we help, what I say, develop the brain-based lens for the parents and the family, and then we can put this package together, and we can do that and stay in the chiropractic lane, but know how to lead with the brain to make the case for what we do, know when it's important and what other things to put in there, brain-based exercises, nutrition, all these other things, on top of a clear, unsubluxated nervous system. It's really, really impactful.
Yeah, that is all amazing because it is so much where the whole family unit. I also think about how some children have possibly been diagnosed or given some label in some way. ADHD has been one that even in my lifetime, I'm 38, and where it used to be something where it seemed fairly rare, and now we're using that term more frequently. Explain to us a little bit, what is ADHD from your perspective and your brain-based approach?
So I always say, and with the doctors that I work with, I say, listen, our job is not to diagnose, right? Our job is not to say whether a person should be doing one modality, one treatment, one medication or the other. There's a time and a place for different things, but our job is to understand more about what is this behavior telling us? And one of those things is when we start training with our docs, one of the things we do is we have to know the conditions we're seeing come in our doors, right? So we have to understand what are some of the common traits that we're seeing in ADD and ADHD, right? There's the component with hyperactivity and then not with ADD. Usually you're seeing impulsivity, right? Usually there's a component of some self-regulation challenges, some control seeking. Usually there's some comorbidities that come along with most of these neurodevelopmental disorders that have a diagnosis. So whether it's oppositional defiant disorder, right? ODD, pathological demand avoidance, PDA, these are common ones. You often see some other diagnoses coming along with that, whether that's ADD, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of different things. I call it like the alphabet soup, right?
Yeah.
Our job, and I always say we have to develop our own relationship with a diagnosis. So as chiropractors or as any provider who works with people who may be coming in with this, Now, sometimes in our field, we're speaking to chiropractors here, right? In our field, because we're more on the holistic side and we're typically like hey, we don't want to cover the symptom side. I think one problem or one mistake that we can easily make is we villainize the diagnosis, right? And the problem with that is that one, there is information that we can gather from just knowing, just saying, oh, this person's coming to me with a diagnosis. Now, do we need a person to have a diagnosis to get the information we need to be able to use our clinical tools and right now strategies? Absolutely not. Is that going to change our clinical tools and right now strategies? No, because that's not what we're looking for. However, we can't, and the way I always say this to parents or people that come with a diagnosis is thanks for sharing that. That tells me a lot of the things that you may be struggling with and some of the traits that you may be really good at. And so I want to talk about that, right? We are validating the journey that they've been on to get that diagnosis. Because when we say, and this is the mistake that we often make, when we say things like, I don't care about the diagnosis. I do not treat that diagnosis, which is true. We do not treat it. But when we say that, what we're saying to that mom who's come to us or dad or person of any age is we're saying that journey that it took you to get to this point. Often it was a journey to get to the point where they had some sort of validation that there's something going on with their child, whether they're a person who is defined by that diagnosis in their mindset or their paradigm or not. To get to that diagnosis, it was a journey and it validated to them that there was something happening and it likely took some time. Now, if we just dismiss it, we are dismissing their whole journey. That's not good, right?
Right.
And so we need to go, what is our relationship as providers with that diagnosis? What does it tell us? What are the little clues that it tells us? And like in ADD and ADHD, we talked about some of those traits like impulsivity, challenges with focus, and hyper focus sometimes, rigidity at sometimes. There's a lot of different traits that we can see, but we're not treating it, but it gives us that information. And then we say, great, we're interested in that. What we do is we look at things a little bit differently, right? We look at your child beyond their diagnosis, beyond their challenges, and we're looking for neurological and functional underpinnings that may be contributing to the way that they are engaging, expressing, learning, connecting in their environment. And we just want to help them be more efficient in those things, whether they have a diagnosis or not, whether they have a diagnosis now. And as we do our work, they end up not having a diagnosis. I've had both of those scenarios many, many times play out in our practice. So when somebody says to me, and this is another mistake when it comes to the diagnosis conversation that I think we make in our profession and on the more holistic side of things, sometimes we get in that trap where people are like, but I don't want my child to have this diagnosis. Can you cure them? And whether they say, can you cure them? Or whether they're not kind of implying or not specifically saying that, but that is their goal. It's important for us to say, we are not treating or curing anything, right? We're looking at inefficiencies and underlying function and seeing how can we help this child be more efficient and joyful and connected and engaging in themselves and outside of themselves. And with that, sometimes they still qualify for a diagnosis when we do that. Sometimes they don't. That's not our goal, right?
Yeah.
And that's really important when we're working with this demographic, to say, even if it's not asked, because it is a nonverbal thought, objection, question, expectation. And it's important to clarify that, or we can kind of lump ourselves into this assumption that we are treating or curing, and we're not. That's not what we're doing. We're diagnosing.
I love that you said inefficiencies, because that feels like, as a mom, something that I can really wrap my head around. It also feels like when you talk about having clinical tools and right now strategies, that you do have all of these markers along the way, and it makes me understand that this is a journey, and it feels like partnering with a child or adult's brain. And I feel like that really gives power back to parents, back to kids. What I would like to go into is, you kind of have mentioned, but all of this is complementary and not taking over a diagnosis. So how is this really complementing whatever else a parent might be doing or trying or looking into?
Yeah, that's great. Most families that come to us and any doctors out there that do this work in pediatrics. And I'll tell you, I like this concept, and I teach this concept of the new family practice, because the reality is now with and you mentioned this earlier, the massive rise in behavioral learning, socialization, mental health challenges in all ages, but definitely pediatrics. And the statistics are there to back that up. Unfortunately, if you're working in a family practice or pediatric practice, you are seeing these kids with these challenges coming into you. It's just more prevalent now. And so we have to know more, right? And one of the things that we have to know is that they're often coming to us with a team already. They're coming to us with a team of providers, occupational therapists, ABA therapists, tutors, speech therapists, all these different people, primary care. And this is another mistake that we have to navigate, and we can very easily, is we have this historical thing of trying to be the only player on the team, right? And kind of villainizing everyone else on the team. Now, my thought and experience and what I teach and what we see results with is it's not about us or them, other providers. It's about us and them. And when we can have simple communication strategies to make the case for what we do to help all of those providers be even more effective and efficient, because we're working on that foundation of the nervous system, it does become very easily an us and them scenario. But we have to approach that properly with the parent first, right? And so when we take verbally, non-verbally in our systems, in the way that we talk about other providers, the way we reference them, we tend to be like, it's just us, right? And when we do that, again, we are not building rapport or trust with the parent, because they're coming to us, even if they haven't gotten all the results they're looking for, they have this group of trusted advisors that they're coming to us with. And so we need to learn how to play on that team. Now, we also need to be able to explain very clearly to the parent and other providers to partner with them how it is that we help, right? I like this concept. I teach this concept called the triangle of simplicity, where it's like, well, how do you actually help kids with ADD or anybody with ADD, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, if you're not treating it? Because that's the model, that mechanistic model of treatment, cover symptoms, just more of the right now, cover the endpoint observable behavior, or improve the endpoint skill set that's a deficit. That's the model typically in these other paradigms, which, there's a time and a place for that. There is a time and a place for that. We don't want to villainize that, but that's not the whole deal. And that's not what we're about. And so we have to be able to explain easily. The real short intro to this, I like to call them communication pegs. I teach through brain-based concepts and communication pegs so we can find the simplicity on the far side of complexity, so we can explain and understand what it is that we actually do, and then we can back into the complexity as we go, right? And that's how we teach in the Focus Academy and the Brain Blossom. So we start by going like, so what is it that you actually do to help these kids? Like, well, we start with what we know, and not just what we know in chiropractic, right? It's like, what do we know about child development, right? About brain development. What do we know? What do we all agree upon? If we look out, we look at all the collaborative research and the research in neuroscience and what all these other providers, what are we agreeing upon? And that is, the brain is not fully developed at birth. We know that. We know that. We know that there's a trajectory of brain development that we have to move through. We know that altered input, I like to say, think of it like a little seed growing into a flower, blossoming. We've got that seed. It has to move through this trajectory of development and growth to blossom and open. But we also know that if we alter the sunlight, the oxygen, the water, all of the stuff that's impacting and inputting into that seed, it will impact the trajectory of the way that seed turns into a blossoming flower. The same with the brain. And so we know that if we alter vision, visual input, if we alter touch, if we alter sound, if we alter love, connection, and also if we alter proper movement, and there's a lot of movement, what we call mechanoreception, turning proprioception, from particularly the upper neck, whole spine, but definitely the upper neck, that inputs information about the body and outside of the body into the brain. And so if we alter input in early life, it has the potential to alter the way the brain moves through development, just like altering light and touch and all of these things. These are inputs. So we know that. We also know that there are things stressors of all different forms, physical, chemical, emotional stressors that have been very well researched that we know can cause some of these alterations and changes in the way that we move through brain development. So we know that stress, we know the brain's not fully developed. We know stress can impact the brain. We know that there are some evidence or some clues that will be left if stress is there, causing some alteration in the brain and the body, metabolic, neurometabolic changes, right? And so one of those things, there's two big ones that we have to look at, and there's more than that, but two big ones that we have to look at is we have to look for those clues of altered input from the spine and the cranium impacting the brain. And that's where chiropractic comes in. And we also have to look at the gut because the gut-brain connection is important. And so that's where diet comes in and microbiome and all of this, leaky gut, all these different things. We have to look at that because we have to look at the inputs and the communication from the brain to the body if we're interested in the way the brain moves through development. Now, if we have alterations in the way the brain is moving through development, it alters the tools that we gain and develop, which then we use to connect and learn and engage in our world. What we know, things like primitive reflexes, gross motor, fine motor, eye movements, visual cognition, executive function, what we know is that in neurodevelopmental disorders and or behavioral learning, socialization, developmental challenges, oftentimes we have some gaps in those tools. We have some inefficiencies. We have some skill sets that maybe they're not quite there yet in development that then can lead to challenges in behavior and cognition and sensory processing and integration, all these things that are common in things like ADD, ADHD, ASD, ODD, PDA, diagnosed or undiagnosed. And so we get this opportunity to step back and say, hey, what are some of the underpinnings that we can address to help create more efficiency in the tools because of the way the brain's moving through development, because we're correcting input to the brain? Bringing that approach in then allows all of the other providers to be collaboratively more productive altogether, all of us together. So that's the medium version. There's a much shorter version we say to parents, but like there's a much longer version we teach doctors to understand. And then we start putting the clinical pieces together to how to actually manage and monitor and put the right clinical systems and assessments into the practice and how to communicate that to parents. But that's the foundation of, no, we're not treating that behavior, but we are understanding that if a child or an adult is having trouble focusing, for example, there's probably a reason for that. And we should explore some of those reasons. Now, are there some times where it's like, yes, but I need them to right now manage their focus and attention and impulsivity in school or in, whatever setting and work, and where people say, well, I need to use some of these right now things like medications and things like that. I'm not here to tell people they can't or can. I always say, well, look at the risk. And understand what it is. It's not curing anything. It's just modifying your tools in that moment when you're impacted by those medications. Right. There's a time and a place. But if you're going to do that, you better also be looking at the reason why the challenge is there in the first place, particularly if we're talking about kids, because we're laying the foundation for their whole life.
I love that. I love that it is, again, the word efficiency in the tools. So whether it is medication or occupational therapy or speech therapy and all of these things, can we get back to this input source so that those things can be more efficient to the point that then you can, like you said, the clinical tools of seeing what is required at a different moment in the journey. Right. Instead of just being like, nope, this is the thing. This is the only thing. But I love that you are training chiropractors because it is something for parents to understand of, I think a lot of us have been at a point in our life where we just feel like we're missing some piece of the puzzle. Yep. Where we're like, okay, we have been doing these things, like you mentioned, gut health and nutrition. There's so many parents who have become more aware of that maybe they're avoiding dyes in their child's food or something. Yep. But they're like, this is not complete. This doesn't look like it's the whole piece of the puzzle. Maybe they're doing, some of these other therapies and things, but I think that as parents, sometimes we feel that innately. We're not quite there yet. And so I love this introduction to chiropractic as a neurological sense, a brain-based sense of getting to that deeper problem. And I think that it makes so much sense to parents. It makes so much sense to chiropractors as well when you describe how to clearly explain this. So I'd love for you to take a minute and tell us a little bit about your programs, about the Brain Blossom program and Focus Academy. What are they?
Yeah, so we have two clinical practices in Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint, Idaho. And from that work, I love how you talked about how, like, maybe you're doing a piece of the puzzle or a piece of the puzzle here. Just from my background, I have a background in neurooptometry before I became a chiropractor. And I've really, in my clinical practices, it's this very collaborative, interdisciplinary approach, right? But with the foundation being the nervous system and chiropractic, because that's what scientifically made the most sense to me and where I've gotten the results is when I apply it in this way. So we've brought in all of these different things: nutrition, microbiome, biomedical, chronic infection, PANDAS, like eye movements, primitive reflexes, neuroeducation, some functional neuro approaches, chiropractic diet, all these things. And we've kind of put them in, and through the 17 plus years, we have created this very systematic way of assessing, reassessing, putting together the clinical strategies and writing up tools, but doing it simply in a chiropractic practice, with foundation being chiropractic. So with that, eventually there were requests to teach chiropractors how to do that. And I was really reluctant actually to do that, because I'm that person. I was just like head down in my practices.
Yeah.
We've got research that we do out of our practices. We partner with Sherman College and Dr. Sarah Hawk there. She's our research partner. But eventually, okay, I'll try to teach this and see, because I realize like it's not really about me, right? And there's a lot of people, the majority of the world does not live in small Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Sandpoint, Idaho, population of less than 100,000 people. So we developed a curriculum in a business called the Focus Academy, where we teach and certify chiropractors to do this work in their chiropractic practices, not, create whole neurosensory gyms, leave chiropractic behind, but how to take principled chiropractors and help them develop their brain-based lens, and then guide them and support them in bringing some of this into their practices so they can be more productive, get better results, be more abundant with this population that is massively expanding. So we offer classes, online, in-person, certification series, extra mentorship after certification series. We have, I think, around 250 chiropractors certified in the Focus approach through the Focus Academy in like 9 different countries now around the world.
Awesome.
And from there also, there's 4 pillars in our approach that we teach. One is, the foundation is chiropractic. 2 is nutrition, diet, biomed. We teach you how to integrate these things in and when, based on your practice style and wants. And 3 is what we call our brain-based games and exercises. It's from this concept of learning all of these hierarchies. There's 8 hierarchies of brain development, and knowing when to do what eye movements and body movements and cognitive games and reflexes and all these things. And we package that up into a program called the Brain Blossom program, so that doctors don't necessarily have to know how to do all of that. We created a custom app where their patients can work through it at home with their kids, engage that concept of neuroplastic change. And we teach them how to work through the app, exercises, and just do like a couple minutes a day at home. And that helps create that change, because it's done very intentionally based on that. We also have in the Brain Blossom stations that our doctors can offer, where we give them new stations every 3 months and they put them up. So after an adjustment, the kids can go and they can do the stations, like 4 stations, under 10 minutes of the brain-based exercises. So it's all done very intentionally based on getting results. And then the 4th pillar is what we call brain-based parenting and mentoring. And that's where the right now strategies and being able to communicate with parents and other providers and help people understand, like, why is the child breaking down in the Ace Hardware parking lot, and what can we do about that? Because that's important for your patients to have that skill, and it does impact results and retention, to be quite honest. So those are the 4 pillars that we teach in the Focus Academy certification series. And then we have, for our members that want to bring Brain Blossom, there's an advanced option after they take the certification series. We have, I think, almost 70 Brain Blossom providers around the world now offering the Brain Blossom program, which is great. And we have a Brain Blossom center now, and that's what we're doing.
Awesome. I love that so much, how you have grown that to be so complete with all of those things. Because in my parenting, we've done speech therapy, we've done occupational therapy. Like, these are things that I personally am familiar with. But then coming back to like that moment when I don't know how old he was, 6-year-old was at the zoo and had scraped his elbow and would not calm down. That moment when, as a parent, you're like, okay, I understand, but what do I do?
Right.
Like that other piece of it where you're like, well, do I scoop you up and take you to get adjusted now?
Yeah.
Okay, so then to have the whole complete picture of knowing that parenting and mentoring aspect, having those games that you can do at home, it really all is putting the power back into the hands of the parents, but also for the child as well, to feel like they're not completely spinning out of control. I think regulation is a word that's becoming more popular, but that idea of self-regulating,
Mhm.
where I'm an 80s kid, we were just like, just stop crying.
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
stop crying.
Behavioralist. Yep.
Yeah. And coming back to now understanding, like, okay, what can we do from, like you said, chiropractic, nutrition, games and exercises, parenting and mentoring?
Yeah.
What can we do through that to help this child have the power back for themselves so that their brain and their nervous system can self-regulate? I think that that's really beautiful, and it's really powerful because I think it grows us as humans to have this understanding and this empathy as well.
hmm Yeah. And I think that's one of the key things, a lot of times doctors, I'll hear them say like, oh, I don't want to work with these kids with these particular challenges because their parents are so hard. And I get it, but that's where we talk about the new family practice and understanding stress neurology and understanding parents. I say, well, you're probably just not working with the parents appropriately and understanding what is happening in their own neurology. And then you see the need to help to develop the parents' brain-based lens and help the parents understand why. And then that allow, some of the biggest challenges that we hear with parents, they don't follow through always on the things I ask them to do, or they miss appointments, or with it, whatever it might be. Those are common ones. And I say, well, yeah, they're living in a place of stress. Their kids melting down, chronically melting down in the Ace Hardware parking lot, or when they put their socks on in the morning. And so you need to understand, how do we create a safe place for that parent? How do we educate that parent, help develop their brain-based lens? How do we get them to see the why? Because once we can get a parent to see the why and then arm them with some right now strategies, you're in.
Yeah.
You're their trusted advisor. You're like what you said. It's like your first place that you thought of was to take your kid to get checked, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, once we can address that, oftentimes doctors don't want to address that. They just want to be married to only the clinical side. And we're dealing with people here. And honestly, now, if you're working in a family practice and you're working with kids, you really don't have a choice whether you see these
Right.
kids or not. They're in your practice.
Right. Right. And I think about that even just in my friend groups, where I can think of really awesome kids who have real challenges. And yeah, we don't get to pick and choose our kids in our family, or, the people that we're around and our sphere of influence and all of that. And so even waking up my 6-year-old this morning and just that little tiny moment, how precious these kids are. And I feel that, like, my nieces and nephews, just when you look at these children and you're like, this is it. This is
Mhm.
life. And they're so precious. And so to be able to give them that, you talked about joy and the fullest life where they can just thrive with whatever they've been handed,
Yep.
through their journey. I
Yep.
think that that's amazing.
I had last week, we had a medical doctor who brought, the dad's a medical doctor, the mom's a reading specialist, an educator, and they brought their child to us. And, we're talking and they're saying like, they're having all these like, as you would imagine, when we get a lot of medical providers actually that bring their kids to us because we've built that reputation. But there's still like some, because it's such a different paradigm for them. And so one of the questions that just came up was, yeah, but we're searching for a diagnosis right now. And so that might change something that you do with her. So maybe we should wait or whatever. And I said, yes, with the diagnosis, understand that there's a time and a place for that, and it can open doors. You just have to ask yourself, what kind of relationship do we want with this diagnosis? And do we want our daughter to have with this diagnosis? And are doors that it's going to open ones that we want to open? So you're in control of that relationship. I said, go for it. But I said, but that diagnosis is not going to change anything we're going to do. We are here to help her regardless of whatever, because the dad was really talking about genetic limitations and things like that. And I said, yeah, we're not here to say we can change any of that or cure, and kind of back to the beginning of this conversation, but we are here to help her be as happy, joyful, and efficient in her life with the tools and skills, including any limitations of matter she may have because of her genetic vulnerabilities. And he was like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's what we're about. And just shifting that paradigm a bit and not saying, so don't do those other things. We're like, go ahead, do them. but here's our role on the team. And
Hmm.
it's like, that makes sense. Like, I am here for that, you know?
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
and that's the thing where you go, yes, these kids, like you talked about your son, waking him up and seeing that joy. So many of these kids now, people cannot see that joy. They
Hmm.
cannot see the children for who they are because their behaviors and challenges are so overwhelming and
Yes.
outward. And that's the thing that everybody sees, that people do not see or have an opportunity to see the actual child. And we are here to actually say, hey, we want your child to express themselves and to be able to have other people see them as well beyond the challenges that they're having. And that's what this work allows us to do. And also partner with parents to give them and that's possible, you know?
I love that. Wonderful. Well, I think we both could talk about this all day long,
Yeah.
but I'm going to put all of the links in the show notes for where everyone can connect with you, where they can find the Focus Academy and Brain Blossom program and all of the things. Thank you so much for sharing today. And just as a mom, it makes me so happy that you are training doctors and putting them in all of these places around the world. And I'm excited to see just what happens next with all of this.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for everything you do to support chiropractors, getting, their message out there and helping them be more abundant and connected in their communities. And yep, anytime.
Yeah, so many people have said chiropractors are so often the best kept secret in their communities. And this kind of, you said multiple times, this brain-based lens, we don't want to keep this a secret. This is not going to be a secret anymore. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you.